Today we're going to do a little bit of GameCube homebrew via Softmod. Now, something that really hasn't been explained entirely is, what is a Softmod? A Softmod is a way of using over-the-counter products and a lot of software manipulation to load some kind of flaw or exploit or some kind of something that is vulnerable inside a console's hardware that will allow you to load your own code. Whether it be homebrew or for bootlegging, it's morally up to you. The GameCube is no different. I think so far the only system that's not vulnerable to some kind of soft mod is the Dreamcast, because we can natively boot Dreamcast discs in a Dreamcast. We can make our own discs. But why can't we make our own GameCube discs? And this is something that you're gonna start noticing a lot with newer consoles. Now, the way the GameCube works is, it uses standard DVDs, yes. It's literally an 8cm standard DVD. There's nothing special about it, it's just a fucking DVD. The same DVDs you put in your Sony Handycam or whatever mini DVD, camcorder you may have that burns directly to disc, you can put directly into a GameCube. Great. GameCubes can also read standard DVDs. The problem is the case is too small and you can't get a full-size disc in, but next episode I'll show you the hard mod where you can get them to fit. However, this is where the similarities with standard DVDs, the GameCube, will end. Now, how does GameCube or Nintendo prevent you from copying GameCube games? And this is where the data layout of the disc is completely complicated. Now I'm going to try to rough it up for you, I'll try to slim it down, but how it works is, instead of the data being written from the inside of the track outward, like most discs, it's actually written from the outside of the track in. There you go. Now, another thing is, within this data, now the disc has to be exactly 1.47, I believe 1.47 gigs in total size. It cannot be any more, it cannot be any less. The reason being is the data that's on the disc is in something called a data frame. It's how the data is laid out on the disc. I'll put some show notes up, and I'll try to put some links so we can explain a little bit more about the data frames and such. But anyway, as the data is laid out, doesn't matter how big or how small the game. It could be 50 megs or it could be 1.4 gigs. The bottom line is there's scrambled data that fills up the entire disc, and this scrambled data goes through a form of XOR cipher stream. Now, XOR is a form of Boolean algebra or computer algebra, and this XOR table has a seed that's generated within the disk structure somewhere that we have not been able to figure out yet. We don't know how to decrypt it yet. But within the disk itself is the seed key on how to decode the XOR table. So when you put the disk in, the GameCube will look at specific spots on the disk to check both the size of the disk and two or three different spots on the disk at specific addresses for the XOR cipher stream. And each disk is completely different. Now, if you take a GameCube disk and you look at it at a certain angle, you'll notice a barcode around the side. And I do believe this is called the burst grid area, or the BGA area. And the GameCube knows how to read that barcode, and that barcode actually tells the cube, okay, this is where you need to look for the actual XOR cipher stream decode data. And that's something a standard PC can't read. So first off, a PC cannot read the data backwards. It can't read the BGA area properly. And even if it could not decipher the ciphertext coming off the XOR stream. So the computer just sees it as garbage data, makes it think that the disk is just scratched to hell. So that's how GameCube discs work. And it's very difficult for us to create, if impossible, right now as we're recording this segment, it's impossible for us to actually create a disk that has an actual XOR cipher stream, because first off, we can't write that barcode around the disk. Most burners, if any commercial burners, just can't do that. And we can't get the XOR data on there properly. So how do we authenticate the session? Now, there's two ways of doing this, through a soft mod and a hard mod. Next episode, I'll show you the hard mod method. In this episode, we're going to focus on a soft mod. Now, the soft mod, what you're going to need is something called a GameCube SD card adapter. This you can buy them on eBay for about 15 bucks. It's called the SD Gecko, or you can build one. If you actually remember episode 8 when I was building PCBs, I was actually building one for myself, this exact thing. You're going to need an SD card. Size doesn't matter. You will not be booting games off this thing. Don't try. It cannot be done yet. And we're going to need an Action Replay. Now, here's the thing about Action Replay. Action Replay is actually produced by Code Junkies in cooperation with Daytel, and they're fucking scumbags, because they have been ripping off all of the open hardware and open software of the homebrew community forever. Point being is, I have an Action Replay version 1.14. I'm not sure what version they're up to right now. You can go online and probably check. But point being is, my shit came with this card, and this card holds all my codes. And that means the Action Replay, the way the Softmod works is we're going to put this in memory card slot A, and we're going to put this in memory card slot B, we're going to put in the Action Replay, we're going to load up a custom code that's going to save to the card, and the card is going to tell the GameCube to boot code off of this thing. Classic Softmod method. You get your code, you get a bootloader exploits something, loads code off of a memory card or a USB thumb drive or some shit like that. Problem being is that because Daytel are corporate monsters and they're, gluttonous, money-hungry assholes, they have removed the add code function, and they've even removed this entire piece of hardware. So what this means to you, the homebrew enthusiast, is you can't add the code that you need to this thing. So if you're going to look for an Action Replay, make sure it comes with this card. It'll show you directly in the bubble packaging. This card should be there. If it's not, put it down, walk away. But the reason they did this was so they can make their own version of their own Softmod. That's right. Daytel took the open source software of SD Load, which you'll see later, and they took the open information on the SD Gecko, and they have marketed it to create their own piece of shit, doesn't work for crap, proprietary, bloated chunk of shit. Yay, Daytel. Good job at being scumbags, you fucking assholes. But, either way, if you can get your hands on this, you can get them off eBay pretty cheap. You might even have them laying around the house. It doesn't take much to create a PCB for the SD card. And to tell you the truth, what I do is, I pop my SD card on. You can just trace these tracks, and then use this shell. Just go and take a file, and just etch away this over here, so you can go and make your own adapter. It's not very difficult, really. If you've paid attention to Episode 8 and some of the electronics projects that we've been doing, you can easily go and get an SD card here to fit in here. Just a matter of just swapping out boards and doing a little bit of filing. But anyway, enough of bitching and moaning. Let's get to the actual GameCube side so I can show you how this Softmod shit works.
Okay. Now, of course, we're going to need an SD card, and the SD card's going to need a little bit of work before we can get it going. The first thing you need to do is make sure you've formatted it with the FAT file system. Okay? The second thing you're going to want to do is you have to go and make sure you copy over a couple of DOL files. Otherwise, you have no homebrew. And I've got some DOL files laying around. I've got some loaders and whatnot. You're going to have to copy over a program called sdloader.bin. Do not rename this file. Keep it all caps. Now, once you actually copied over your homebrew and once you copied over sdloader.bin, you'll notice that we have sdpatch.exe. Open up a command window, and you're going to want to type in sdpatch.exe and then type in the card letter, which in my case would be F:. Now, once you hit enter, it's going to say the SD card has been patched successfully, and the file system on it should remain completely functional as before. And you may now proceed to the next step of the Action Replay SD card bootloader installation process. What this has done is it is actually put on the master boot record to actually boot native code off homebrew code for the cube off the SD card across GPIO pins. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select this SD card inside the SD Gecko memory card adapter, and we're going to go to the Action Replay side, and we're going to go and load up SD load and some of this bitchin' homebrew. Here we have a standard GameCube booting up. We've got Action Replay version 1.14. We got the SD card in memory slot A and the Action Replay hardware in slot B. You can determine what version of Action Replay you have by looking at the center ring on the disc itself. You look at it reflecting off of a bright light, and there'll be a hologram that tells you exactly what version you have. So, go to your Action Replay codes, choose your region, and create a new code called SD load. You're going to have to put in a 3-line master code and anywhere from a 29 to a 30-something line actual code itself. It's a very long process. Now, there are 2 codes that you have to use depending on what version Action Replay you have. Now, this is a long, tedious process. I would suggest grab a beer, take your time, and do it right the first time. Check, double check, and triple check your work, because one mistake will create lots of problems for you. So once you have everything up and running and you got that code saved to your hardware, hit your start button, and your GameCube is going to order you to open the lid, and you will obey. Put in an original game, any original game. The actual Action Replay itself will do just fine. Close the lid, and it's going to execute the code, which is going to tell the GameCube to load sdload.bin off the SD card in slot A. And lo and behold, like magic, there's SD load. There's all your GameCube DAW files executable straight from your SD card. Now, at any time, you can pull this SD card out and put new files on it, put it back in, and it will refresh. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and explain all the homebrew I have on here because that's what the fun of all this is. Going ahead and find out what works, what doesn't, what sucks, what rocks, and what floats your boat and what sinks your battleship. The one thing I do want to show you, which definitely floats my boat and sinks my battleship, is GCOS version 1.5, GameCube OS. This is a disk loader. It has a whole bunch of fun tools in there. I'm not going to get into the discrepancies of every little function of it, but it tells you what BIOS you're running, what revision, what drive model you have, the status, and what kind of drive firmware patches you might be running. You can boot an original game, you can boot a backed up game, you can also boot your own games, or your own homebrew games and your own homemade disks with an assload of DAW files on them. In the tools section, you can back up your original games to an ISO. If you have a broadband adapter, what it will do is you put your disk in, it'll point you to an HTTP server that will run on the GameCube and tell you exactly where to go to point your file browser. Use Internet Explorer over Firefox. Internet Explorer has less issues. Don't know why. They're working on it. But either way, you can back up your original games. You can boot your real IPL or your original BIOS. You can go to a Disk Explorer, which will allow you to put raw files straight onto a disk and boot those files from disk. So if you don't have to keep going to the SD card every single time you want to boot something new, you can go ahead and put 1.4 gigs worth of files straight onto that 8cm disk. Or if you have a modded case, you can go up to 3 gigs on a standard 4.5 gig disk. Now you can also set up a server on your network side and browse files across your network, so you won't even have to burn disks or put shit on your SD card. You can just go ahead and do it over LAN. Now, there are other loaders and there are other ways of getting code to run on your cube, but remember that piracy sucks because the XOR stream data is really hard to pull off disks, and the original games that were dumped weren't dumped properly. You'll have a bitch of a time getting them to boot. So if you're going to go and be some hardcore, piracy kitty, the bottom line is if you're going to do bootlegging, pirate the games yourself. They'll be a little bit more reliable than relying on someone else to dump them for you. Not that I speak from experience or anything.